Hi, and welcome to the Scientistsage Sangha. Tonight, I'm Nancy Anderson Dolan. I'm Nancy Anderson Dolan most nights, but tonight as well. And I'm from Wise Heart Wellness. And tonight we're going to talk about presuppositions. And this is an interesting idea that I didn't really want to talk about. It took a little convincing for the universe to keep leading me down the path, but basically, presuppositions are like just widely held beliefs that people have about particular things. And they might be so widely held, like they're taken for granted, like the idea of gravity. It's just like we take gravity for granted. We don't open the door and see if we float up or our feet touch the ground. So there's things like that. And they can be implied, like when you say, oh, so and so quit smoking, it's implied that they used to smoke. So there's these presuppositions that help us understand things. And I'm not an English teacher, but I understand the concept here. And they really help us when we're interacting with the world. Like when we go to any country in the world, there's a presupposition that we'll be able to give people money of some sort and get things. And that's not true in some places, but we have that sort of idea that it will be like that. And different kinds of things, they actually change how we perceive things and how we reason things through, like why something happened the way it did. And so we might, wonder why there was a bus crash, and we might, oh, it's winter in Seattle and there's a bus crash, and so there must have been snow and ice, and so it helps us navigate the world and think about things, and we use them actually when we learn and we think about projects, and when we explore places. We assume that a map that says north will take us in a certain direction, and so we have these ideas that we work with all the time. But if they're not up to date or inaccurate, or they maybe are just phantoms of our mind, they can be problematic. And it's great when they're useful and they're not harmful to anybody. And even if they're not entirely accurate, but if they're accurate enough to help us get through things. Like when people are going to a theater, they're assumed there's going to be chairs for them to sit down in. And so they'll make those leaps. And that's really helpful. And they can actually be a really positive force that can connect us with other people. And that can be that, we all want to clean up the environment, or we all want to help somebody that is struggling, things like that. They can be amazingly motivating and helpful too. But it can also be really negative and divisive, and they can, and just outright destructive, like the ideas that are still being perpetuated about people of color, or the ideas that some people are hanging on to from different beliefs about the world, about what's wrong and what's right. And without that malleability to have another person's view of the world. And so when people that have very different views come head to head, often there's a lot of conflict. And the given that I'm recording this on Halloween, I'm going to refer to these difficult presuppositions as ghosts that haunt us, because they really do show up that way. When we don't, when we believe that dumping things in water will not pollute the ocean, when we have that ghost will haunt us for a very long time, because we have followed that belief from early on. And there are still some people that believe it, that it's their right to dump refuse in the water. And so those kinds of things really are ghosts that haunt us for a long time. And if we learn certain presuppositions, like when people have starkly different ideas, like when the Europeans came to other places and the indigenous people there had no concept that people might want to take their land, because it was apparent to anyone with any amount of sanity in their culture that everything was shared. And so those two different things allowed the Europeans to come in and decimate the indigenous way of life and harm people's lives and even their life paths going forward, their ways of life. And so there's all that kind of conflict when people don't share the same presuppositions and don't know they don't, because they both go into it thinking this is the way it is. And so there are real problems that erupt in that stage. And years, decades later, we're still dealing with those issues. And so these ideas about presupposition can be so important. And even when people just on a one-to-one basis are encountering somebody with different ideas, it can be very difficult. I was traveling down in the US to visit some relatives at a family reunion, and someone asked me about what gun they should bring to Canada when they came. And I'm like, no guns. And just that radical difference totally caught me by surprise. I almost thought it was a joke, but they were dead serious about it. And so these really different ideas, like the presupposition was that, I'm packing, what should I bring? And that was totally beyond my idea. And so, like that's why I couldn't catch on to it very quickly, because it didn't fit any of my presuppositions. So those kinds of things can create gaps, and that sort of idea that there are these really differing things is important ones for us to hold. Now, we can't assume that everybody around us is going to think entirely different than us, but it's really useful to move forward thinking that's a possibility. And I have a couple of situations that I often run into these things. One with a friend, an American Jewish woman with 7 children who lives in Russia, and me being a Canadian lesbian woman with 2 boys who lives in Canada. We have a lot of confusing things. And another friend of mine who is from the South Sudan, a small village in South Sudan, and she immigrated to Canada, and we are talking a lot, and it's very clear that things are a little different for both of us, and we don't necessarily know when these presuppositions are getting in the way. And sometimes it's hilarious because we're talking about different things, and now I pay attention to people's faces. And so when I say, oh, we're going to do this and this and this, and can you do that? And the person will look at me like, I can tell they're, struggling with context for what I'm saying. But my friend in Russia, we only communicate on the phone. And often we'll talk for 2 or 3 more minutes. And one of us will say, wait a minute, I got to back up. I don't understand where this conversation is going. I don't understand the context for it. And then all of a sudden we'll go, okay, oh, this is how it would be in my life, and this is how it is in that person's life. And those different kinds of things can be really problematic. It can get very awkward. And, to ask somebody if their presupposition is different than yours, it can be a little uncomfortable. So I encourage people to really think about their presuppositions when they're going about things, and particularly in areas of your life that aren't moving as smoothly as you would like, because that often means that there's a difference of opinion, a difference of perception going on. And so that idea about thinking it through sort of ahead of time, I thought that I was doing that really well. And when I was helping people with mobility issues, because I've done that for some people around me and some people I work with, and I thought I had a handle on it until I broke both my legs. And then I realized I had barely a glimpse or, very thin understanding about it. And it was really surprising for me because this was something I've worked really hard at. And it still wasn't useful. Like I diligently worked at this and sat down and thought about it, and I still didn't have the understanding of it. And so it's useful to put ourselves literally in someone else's shoes, so to speak, and talk to them about, like, what is it about, like, your daily life? How do you make decisions about these things? And I've learned to do that with my friends, and it's been amazing to find out where they're coming from and how they're looking at the world. But also in therapy, when I talk to people, like, why do you think you persist with this, whatever this is? And often they'll go back to a presupposition. And even when they say it out loud, they go, oh, that doesn't make a lot of sense, that I think this, and this is what's happening, and I don't really believe it. So they move around in it and check it out like that. And so there's those kinds of ones, but I want to talk about different other sort of almost community kinds of ones. The things about Indigenous cultures and our typical European-based kind of culture. There's an idea in an Indigenous culture that everybody is deeply connected to Mother Earth and seeing the planet as a living thing, and those kinds of things, the importance of ceremony and harmony and balance in the world, and the reality of spiritual connections and communications for wisdom, and sort of like daily assistance from guides, from spiritual guides. And things like nonlinear time, that's a really difficult one for people who are as linear time oriented as most, Caucasian people are on the planet. But there are some overlaps, as you might notice, because there are other spiritual communities that take a given belief. But again, now this is a really good example of how deep that belief might be. So a spiritual community might believe that it's good to be a good person, and that might go through most of the community. And then other people might think there are only some good people, and then there are bad people. And bad people are not, in our religion, and those kinds of things. So it can get divisive there. And the idea that all spiritual paths are similar and think similar things is clearly not accurate, because a lot of spiritual paths divert and even have conflicting opinions within the different spiritual communities. So, but a lot of the practices have been followed for literally thousands of years. So when those presuppositions are in there deeply like that, it can be really mind-bending to try and understand somebody else's experience there. And I mean, it could be literally like the way we do research in sort of modernized, developed countries. We dream up presuppositions, basically. Like we assume there's gravity, or we assume what they call the Good Samaritan inclination, that people will help other people, all sorts of things like that. And they can develop theoretical assumptions and go with them and work with them for decades and decades before they're proven wrong. Well, look, for years, well, more than years, for centuries, they thought the Earth was flat, and then proved it wasn't. And then the idea that tobacco was fine, and then it wasn't. And so there's a number of things like that, or that climate change wasn't a real thing, but more and more we're seeing the evidence of it. And so these presuppositions are also based on developing thought, which is challenging as well. And even in a personal idea that I encourage people to start with is the ideas that, do I understand the lives of people closest to me? Do I understand what their presuppositions are? And we don't always. And when we start to ask, well, and in a really genuine way, but what are you thinking when you say those things or do those things? Why do you want to do those things? Why do you think that is the right thing to do? And it's not easy to have those conversations, because we are a little defensive of our presuppositions. We don't want to be made a fool of. We don't want to be challenged. We don't want to be uncomfortable. There's all sorts of reasons that we don't want to look too closely at those presuppositions, because they make our life work, we think. And so they may or may not, but we think they do. And that is enough to make us challenge from looking too deeply at them. And so it's interesting. I believed when I joined a 12-step program in 1989, really far back, that my recovery, I was told actually my recovery would be a lifelong process. And actually that presupposition kind of horrified me to begin with. Like, come on, it can't take that long. But as I was looking for a quick fix, and my presupposition going in there was somewhere there'll be something to fix things, because it was very much there was a pill for things or a program, or you go in and you do 12 weeks, and then you'd be good. And so that kind of idea was really foreign to me. Now, as I grew used to it, I learned the wisdom about it and found the peace that it would bring. That presupposition is a wonderful thing. And I continue to use that it will be a lifelong thing. And that helps me move through difficult times and helps me stay in for the long game. And so our presuppositions are going to be tested. And it's great to explore them. But now when I'm looking at the shift of the presupposition, I really think about what else could I consider? So presuppositions in the idea about, I'm hitting a wall here. And it could be anything. It could be someone looking for a job or a partner, or they're not sure why they can't find things they enjoy, just different things like that. Looking for those presuppositions. What have I got? I think that when I find something that is really fun, it'll be fun every time, and it'll draw me to it, and I will just know everything the minute I see it. And lots of people are feeling like that. And I really encourage people to no, it doesn't usually unfold that way. It more unfolds like you try something out, and then you want to be able to do it really well, really fast, and you can't. And then you have to keep going back to it and find out the things after trying a number of things that really, when you sit still, make you interested. And so it's a very much being very present kind of thing to find out what are my presuppositions, how could they be stalling parts of my life that I would really like to be able to extend, whether that's, learning to become a good cook. I thought that would be way easier than it was. And so I've pretty much sort of abandoned that one for me. I don't have as much patience. So I learned just a few things that I can do well, and I stay with those. So these ideas about presuppositions will help you determine, moving through your life, what are the things you like to do and how you want to do them. And that applies across the board to relationships, to work, to making your bed, to what kind of house you want to live in, all sorts of things like that. And often we're not willing to see when things go against our presupposition. And where the city where I live has had some early snow, and I did not have any presupposition that the snow would hold off very long. And it came very early, but I raked my leaves early because what I understood as a presupposition is we can't bet on a particular date when there's going to be snow in my city. And that was really useful to me. So, like I say, there's this different idea of what presuppositions are, and they can be really harmful. Like thinking it's okay to drive 260 miles an hour because that's what the speedometer on your car says, or it can be really helpful with the idea of thinking, people are generally kind, so I'm going to be kind to them, and they are very likely to be kind to me. Often those are things that it doesn't mean it's the absolute, actual, always truth. But when you think about presuppositions like that, there's a branch of neurolinguistic programming that talks about this, just picking up presuppositions. And what they suggest are things like Everyone is doing the best that they can, given the resources they have at the moment. That presupposition often puts them in good stead with other people. It makes connections, it makes life more positive. And so those are presuppositions too, and these are chosen ones. I'm not debating that they are research-based and proven or anything like that. Because, and in daily life, they may not prove out to everyone, but if I hold the presupposition, I actually move forward differently in life. So our presuppositions, we want to check to see, are they helping me? Are they practical? And are they making me enjoy life more? Are they making connections with life? Are they shutting me down, making me fearful? Are they allowing me to expand my life and know myself better, be present to myself? These things are tricky. It can be literally disruptive and even very deeply disturbing to investigate our presuppositions, but it's very worthwhile. And we might find we want to change some, and we might find we want to keep some. So I'd really invite you to come on that journey, looking at presuppositions, ones that might be negative, ones that might be positive, ones that help you, ones that hold you back a bit, and see where you want to go with it. And a quick contemplation here at the end. I'll invite people that are with me live to close their eyes, put up your feet, whatever you want to do, and really feel into the ideas that you might base a positive life on. And it might be something as expansive and comforting as things happen for a reason. And I can participate positively, regardless of what happens. Or it might be something as small and specific as people should have pets. And whatever those things are, if you're having a negative response to life of some kind, it's really useful to just sit down and contemplate what kinds of thoughts you might be having. What thoughts support that idea that things are difficult, or the resistance to life as it is? What kind of thoughts support that? Even things like healing. Unfortunately, there's a lot of disclaimers on healing that sometimes turn out to be things that get in people's minds and prevent them from healing. And so if you're going into an issue of recovering from any kind of situation, whether it be like a divorce or a accident or a financial issue, see if you have presuppositions that suggest maybe there isn't healing from those things. And you might even create positive presupposition mantras in your mind. And you might have to take apart some presuppositions that you learned early and put them out to pasture release them for a while at least, and see if you want to use them. Are they being effective for you? Just take a few deep breaths and relax into just letting those ideas float. Just float by. And as I said earlier, I would really recommend that people take some time and think about what their presuppositions about life are, and even write them down and take them for a test drive in the real world. So for the people with me live, we'll commence a live discussion in a moment as I shut the recording down. And for those of you with us on the recording, thank you so much for tuning in and listening. And always, I'm open to questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions about words you'd like to be sharing about and talking about. You can send those to scientistsage@gmail.com. Thanks again. Good night. I am with you. You are with me. Blessed be.